All right, so we got a really interesting request from one of our listeners to take a deep dive into Vince DelMonte's upside-down training.
Yeah, definitely interesting name.
It is right.
Kind of hints that we're going to be looking at things a little bit differently.
Yeah, flipping the script a little bit.
And that's exactly what we're going to do.
Yeah, and so we're diving into DelMonte's method, which basically focuses on fixing your weaknesses before you even start thinking about, like, hitting the weights heavy and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because it's this fundamental idea that, to build something strong and resilient, you have to start with a good foundation.
Like a house.
Yeah, like a house.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so upside down training, or UDT as we'll probably call it, is all about identifying and correcting these muscle imbalances and weaknesses that we all have before we start lifting heavy and, just getting into those really intense workouts.
Yeah, so it's kind of like making sure all your ducks are in a row before you, try and run a marathon or something. So let's talk about the man behind this a little bit, Vince DelMonte. His own story is actually pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it's pretty inspiring.
He went from being a self-described skinny Venny to gaining like a massive 41 pounds of muscle in just 6 months.
Wow.
Which is incredible. And that kind of transformation got him noticed, ended up on magazine covers.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge change.
It is a huge change.
In a short amount of time.
Yeah, and even became like a national fitness model champion.
Wow.
So, and beyond his own success, he also created this no-nonsense muscle building program online, which has been endorsed by like over 7 different fitness experts.
That's great. So, it's not just theory. It's really based on experience and recognized by others in the fitness field.
Exactly. Yeah, it's tried and true.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting about this whole approach is that it's so focused on the individual, right?
Yeah, and that's what's different about this program. A lot of other training programs are designed for a general audience.
Right. They're not really personalized.
Exactly. And DelMonte recognizes that everyone has, a unique way that their body is aligned.
Yeah, we all have our own little quirks and things.
Exactly. Little imbalances that we've developed over time in certain areas where we're weaker than others. And so the core mission of UTT is to spend at least 4 weeks specifically addressing those areas and making sure that both sides of your body are contributing equally.
I like how he uses a really good analogy to describe this. He says, imagine, your car's about to go on a really long trip.
Okay.
Maybe even over some rough terrain.
Right.
You wouldn't just jump in and, hope for the best, would you?
You want to make sure everything's good to go.
You want to get a tune-up, check the tires, make sure everything's aligned. And that's essentially what UDT is doing for your body.
I see.
It's like a comprehensive service before you start, putting serious strain on the engine, which in this case is, lifting those heavier weights.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and the point he makes is that if you bypass this stage and you just jump straight into trying to lift really heavy, those hidden weaknesses are going to come out sooner or later.
Yeah, and probably sooner.
Yeah, exactly. And, you might hit a plateau in your progress, or even worse, you could end up with an injury.
Right, you could really hurt yourself.
Yeah, and he compares it to, constructing a tall building on unstable ground.
Oh, wow, okay.
It might look impressive at first, but eventually those underlying issues are going to, compromise the entire structure.
Yeah, the foundation is key.
Exactly. So let's get into, this tune-up process then.
Okay.
The very first priority in upside-down training is improving your posture by stretching muscles that have become shortened over time or tight.
Okay.
So DelMonte explains that good posture isn't just about looking good.
Right, it's important for your health.
Yeah, it's a combination of lengthening those tight muscles and then strengthening the ones that have become weak.
I see.
So this initial phase lasts for a full week, and it's all about stretching daily.
Every day?
Every day.
Okay.
And he gives a really detailed list of stretches.
Like what kind of stretches are we talking about?
So it covers pretty much everything from your lower body, right up to your shoulders, and even forearms.
Okay. That's comprehensive.
Yeah, so for your legs and lower back, for example, he recommends stretches like lying down to stretch your low back.
Okay.
What he calls a letter T stretch, a kneeling hip flexor stretch.
Okay.
Stretching your quads while lying on your side, a supine hamstring stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Stretches for your glutes and your piriformis, which are those deep hip rotators.
Okay.
A double leg straddle stretch, a stretch for the tensor fascia latae, which is a muscle on the outside of your hip. And then finally, a forward lunge calf stretch.
Wow, that's a lot for the lower body.
And that's still the lower body.
So what about the upper body?
So for the upper body, he focuses on the trapezius muscles in your upper back and neck, your chest, using a doorway or a wall, the anterior shoulder, which is the front of your shoulder, your back, using a wall for leverage, the quadratus lumborum, and lats, which are muscles in your lower back, and sides, a seated lateral stretch. and even stretches for your forearms while kneeling.
It really seems to hit every muscle group.
It does, yeah. And the reason for that is that all of these muscles, if they get too tight, can pull your body out of alignment.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And so
And is it like a one-size-fits-all approach? Or...
No, it's not. And that's what's great about it.
Okay.
He actually advises you to tailor the stretching based on your own unique postural tendencies.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah. So, for example, if you have what's called an anterior pelvic tilt, which is where your pelvis tilts forward, and you often have a bit more of a pronounced curve in your lower back.
Okay.
Yeah. He suggests that you should spend more time stretching your quads, which are the muscles on the front of your thigh, and your hip flexors, which are the muscles at the front of your hips.
Okay, so it's really about targeting the specific areas that need it?
Exactly. Yeah. And then if you have a posterior pelvic tilt, which is the opposite, where your pelvis is kind of tucked under a bit,
Right.
the focus then shifts to stretching your hamstrings, which are the muscles on the back of your thighs.
Okay.
He also talks about, how your feet are positioned when you stand.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so if your feet tend to point slightly outwards, it could indicate tightness in that tensor fascial latae, or TFL, that we just mentioned, and also the iliotibial band, or ITB, which runs down the outside of your thigh.
Okay.
And then if your feet point outwards quite a bit more severely, it might mean you also have tightness in your adductors, which are those inner thigh muscles, in addition to the TFL, the ITB, and the hip flexors.
So he's really looking at every little detail.
Yes, yeah.
And how everything's connected.
Yeah, and then, for those of you who might struggle with exercises like the overhead squat, maybe you can't get very low while keeping your back straight and your arms overhead.
Right, right.
He says that often points to, potential restrictions in flexibility around your shoulder, hip, and ankle joints.
I see.
And specifically, he mentions tight hip flexors, quads, calves, chest, and shoulder muscles as common culprits that can limit your range of motion in that movement.
Yeah, so really working on those areas.
Yeah, and now he does include a really important piece of advice here.
Okay.
If you have a condition that you don't think these stretches are addressing,
Right.
or if you suspect that the underlying issue might be something more structural, like a nerve problem or a difference in leg length,
Okay.
he strongly recommends seeking help from a qualified professional.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, that could be a physical therapist, a chiropractor, a massage therapist.
Right.
And he really emphasizes that it's so important to get to the root of the problem, not just try and treat the symptoms.
I agree.
And he also shares some bonus tips to help you get the most out of this stretching week.
Okay, what are those?
So he suggests trying to incorporate stretching into each of your workouts,
Okay.
either before you start or after you finish, whichever feels better for your body.
I usually do it after.
Now, he actually personally prefers stretching after a workout because he finds it helps with relaxation.
Right.
But the key message really is to make stretching a priority and do it consistently.
Right.
He recommends holding each of those static stretches for at least 60 seconds on each side.
Okay.
And even working your way up to 2 or 3 minutes for those muscles that feel particularly tight.
Okay.
And, he emphasizes not being afraid to spend a little extra time on the areas that need the most attention.
Yeah, some areas are tighter than others.
Exactly, yeah. And it's not just about passively holding the stretch.
So what else should you be doing?
Well, he stresses that you should be stretching with a goal in mind to actually increase your range of motion from week to week.
Okay.
So he suggests, finding a calm and relaxed environment where you can really focus on your body. And
I'll take that.
And his overall point is that this dedicated week of stretching can really set the stage for the rest of the program.
I see.
And your body will definitely thank you for it.
It's a good foundation.
Exactly. So after that first week dedicated to stretching, we move on to priority number 2, which is improving posture by strengthening muscles that are weaker or imbalanced.
Okay.
And this is where the upside-down nature of the training might really become apparent.
Okay, how so?
So the main idea here is to minimize any differences in strength between the two sides of your body.
Right, because we all have a dominant side.
We do, yeah.
And that can lead to imbalances.
Exactly. And so to do this, he recommends focusing on unilateral exercises, meaning exercises where you're working one limb at a time using free weights or cables.
Okay.
And during this phase, you actually avoid all bilateral movements where you're using both arms or both legs simultaneously, like a traditional barbell bench press or a lat pull-down machine.
Okay.
And the reasoning for that is that if one side is stronger, it's naturally going to tend to compensate during those bilateral exercises.
Right, it's going to take over.
Yeah. And that can actually worsen the strength imbalance over time, often without even realizing it.
So you might think you're working both sides equally, but
But you're not.
yeah,
The stronger side is likely picking up more of the load.
that makes sense.
Yeah. And this leads to what DelMonte refers to as Ian King's weak side rule, which is named after the Australian strength coach.
Okay.
And this rule has a couple of important parts. First, you always train the side of your body that's weaker or injured first.
Okay.
And you stretch the side that feels tighter first.
Right.
And then you might train your stronger or more flexible side. But this is crucial. You never do more repetitions, lift a heavier weight, or hold a stretch for longer on the strong or flexible side than what your weak or tight side is capable of doing.
Okay, so you're really trying to even things out.
Yeah,
Bring the weaker side up to match the stronger side.
exactly. And he gives a really clear example using leg extensions.
Okay.
So let's say you could only manage 5 repetitions with good form on your left leg, which you've identified as your weaker side.
Okay.
According to this rule, even if your right leg feels like you could easily do 15 or more,
Right.
you should only do a maximum of 5 repetitions on that side as well.
Okay.
It's all about bringing the weaker side up to the level of the stronger side, not continuing to develop the stronger side at a faster rate.
Right. You don't want to make the imbalance worse.
Exactly. And he also makes a point about training through a full range of motion.
Okay.
Now, there are some training philosophies out there that suggest using a limited range of motion can be beneficial in certain situations.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
But DelMonte argues that if you only move through part of the potential range, you're only working a part of the muscle.
So you're not getting the full benefit.
Exactly. And he believes that to really stimulate maximum muscle fiber growth and even potentially tap into muscle you haven't fully engaged before you need to move through the complete available range of motion for each exercise.
That makes sense.
So he then lays out some specific upper and lower body strengthening exercises that fit with this, one-sided approach.
Okay.
And often using resistance bands or tubing.
Okay.
So for the upper body, he suggests standing rows, using a band, basic lat pull-downs, with a band which I'm assuming are done one arm at a time.
Right.
Lateral raises with tubing and reverse flies, also using tubing.
Okay.
And for the lower body, the exercises include hip abduction, using a band, so moving your leg away from the midline, single leg kickbacks, single leg hip extensions, which are like a glute bridge done on one leg, and alternating Supermans where you lift one arm and the opposite leg simultaneously.
Okay.
All of these naturally focus the work on one side of the body at a time.
Right. Right.
And just like with the strengthening section, he provides guidance on how to choose which strengthening exercises might be most important based on your specific postural issues.
Okay, so how do you do that?
So if you have that anterior pelvic tilt, we talked about the focus here would be on strengthening your abdominal muscles to help pull your pelvis back into a more neutral position.
Okay.
For a posterior pelvic tilt where the hamstrings are often tight, the recommendation is to strengthen the spinal erectors, which are those muscles that run along your lower back.
Okay.
Strengthening them can help support a more upright posture.
Right.
And going back to the position of your feet, if you notice a slight outward turn, it could be an indicator of weak glute muscles, so exercises that specifically target your glutes, become a priority in this strengthening phase.
Okay.
And then for a more significant outward turn of the feet, which as we discussed, can also involve tight inner and outer thigh muscles, the focus shifts to strengthening the hip extensors, which are your main buttock muscles, and the hip abductors, which are the muscles on the outer part of your thigh that help you move your leg away from your body.
So it's really tailored to each individual.
It is, yeah.
Based on their needs.
Exactly. So we've spent a week stretching the tight muscles.
Right.
Now we're focusing on strengthening the weaker ones one side at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So priority number 3, which typically starts around days 14 to 21 of the program, is all about improving posture by increasing the stability and strength of your core.
Your core. Okay, so that's like your abs and your lower back and all.
Exactly, yeah. And this is a really crucial link in the chain of good posture.
Okay, why is that?
So DelMonte explains that your core muscles play a vital role in keeping your pelvis correctly aligned.
Yes.
And if your pelvis is out of alignment, it can have a knock-on effect up your spine and even down into your lower legs, throwing everything else out of whack.
Oh, wow. So it really is the foundation
It is, yeah.
for everything.
And it even gives you a simple test you can do at home to check for weak core muscles.
Okay, what's that?
So lie on your back with your knees bent at a 90-degree angle and your feet flat on the floor like you're about to do a sit-up.
Okay.
Now try to sit all the way up, keeping your arms by your sides without using any momentum and without your feet lifting off the ground.
Okay.
If you find you can't do that, he says, it's a pretty good indication that your abdominal muscles are likely quite weak.
Interesting.
Yeah. And he makes an important point about The goal of the abdominal program during this stage,
Okay.
it's not necessarily about getting visible six-pack abs.
Right.
The primary focus here is on injury prevention, specifically supporting the health of your lower back, hips, and lower extremities.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and that kind of aesthetic development he mentions typically comes later in his more comprehensive programs.
Right. So this is more about laying the groundwork.
Exactly, yeah. So the abdominal program at this stage includes exercises like air bike crunches, janda sit-ups, which are where you actively press your heels into the floor as you do the sit-up, full sit-ups, lying side crunches, supine double leg raises, alternating toe touches, and hip thrusts.
Okay, that's a good variety.
Yeah, and for most of these, he recommends doing 3 sets of 10 to 15 repetitions with a tempo of 101, which means you keep the movement relatively continuous.
Okay.
The hip thrusts get a slightly longer rest period of 1 to 2 minutes between each of the 3 sets of 10 to 15 repetitions.
Okay.
And he also shares some bonus tips for this abdominal circuit.
Okay, like what?
So he suggests trying to perform all the exercises back to back with no rest in between, almost like a continuous flow,
Okay.
and using a slightly quicker tempo than you might normally.
Okay.
He recommends starting with just 1 set of 10 repetitions for each exercise and gradually building up to 2 sets of 15 with a short break after you complete all the exercises in the set.
Okay.
And he even jokes that you might feel like your stomach is being ripped apart, which gives you an idea of the intensity he's aiming for.
Yeah, intense.
Yeah, unless you're feeling particularly sore. He suggests doing this abdominal routine every time you work out.
Okay.
And he notes that because you're not using added weight and the volume isn't excessively high, your abs should recover relatively quickly.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so moving on to priority number 4, which is focused on improving posture by increasing the stability of your shoulders.
Okay, sure.
And he links this stage to the idea of habit formation,
Interesting.
pointing out that if you've been consistent with the stretching and strengthening for the first 21 days, you should be starting to see and feel some positive changes in your body.
Okay, yeah.
He explains that if the muscles that help stabilize your shoulder joint are weak, it can lead to your shoulders rotating edwards and a rounded posture.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, and it's not just about appearance.
Right.
It can also contribute to shoulder pain and functional issues down the line.
Okay, so how can you tell if you have a problem?
So he gives us a couple of simple ways to check if you might have some shoulder stability issues.
Okay.
One way is to stand sideways in front of a mirror.
Okay.
If you can easily see the top of your upper back in the reflection without consciously pulling your shoulders back, that's a sign that your shoulders might be internally rotated.
Okay.
Another check involves standing facing the mirror and looking at the position of your thumbs when your arms are relaxed at your sides.
Okay.
So if your thumbs are pointing straight ahead, you're likely in good shape.
Okay.
If they're angled inwards towards your thighs, that suggests some degree of internal rotation.
Okay.
And if you look down and can see your palms or even the backs of your hands and thumbs facing the wall behind you, that could indicate more significant internal rotation.
So it's like a scale
It is, yeah.
of how bad it is.
And he often attributes this internal rotation to an imbalance frequently caused by doing too much work for the chest muscles
Right.
and not enough exercises that involve pulling or working the external rotator muscles of the shoulder.
Okay, so you need to balance it out.
Exactly. Yeah, and everyday activities like driving, sitting at a desk, or even carrying things can also contribute to this imbalance.
That makes sense.
So the solution, he says, is to specifically focus on strengthening those external rotator muscles of the shoulder and the muscles that control your scapula or shoulder blades.
Okay, so what kind of exercises are we talking about?
So the shoulder stability program includes exercises like retractions, where you focus on squeezing your shoulder blades together as if you were trying to pinch a pencil between them.
Okay.
Reverse flies, using resistance tubing or light dumbbells external rotation exercises, also with tubing or dumbbells diagonal external rotation, again, using tubing or dumbbells, and prone dumbbell reverse flies, where you lie face down on a bench and lift light dumbbells out to the sides.
Okay, so a lot of focus on the rotator cuff.
Exactly. And for most of these, he recommends 2 to 3 sets of 10 to 15 repetitions with a slower, more controlled tempo of 303.
303.
Which means 3 seconds to perform the active part of the movement, no pause, and 3 seconds to return to the starting position.
Okay.
The prone dumbbell reverse flies get a slightly longer rest of 1 to 2 minutes between sets.
Okay.
And again, he includes some bonus tips suggesting that you can perform these exercises as a continuous circuit with no rest between them,
Okay.
focusing on maintaining that slow and controlled tempo throughout.
Okay.
He advises starting with 1 set of 10 repetitions for each exercise and gradually working up to 2 sets of 15.
Okay.
He emphasizes that the primary goal here isn't to heavily fatigue the muscles,
Right.
but rather to switch on and activate the rotator cuff muscles and external rotators so they're properly engaged and ready to stabilize your shoulder joint when you move on to heavier lifting.
Right. It's about stability.
Yeah, exactly. And he recommends incorporating this mini routine before every upper body workout,
Okay.
especially before you plan on lifting heavier loads, as it could be a great way to protect your shoulder joint and allow for pain-free training.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, so by priority number 5, we're shifting our focus to improving functional strength and overall conditioning using body weight exercises.
Okay, body weight exercises.
Yeah, and DelMonte quotes Alwyn Cosgrove, who famously said that you have no freaking business using a load if you can't stabilize, control, and move efficiently using only your body weight.
That's a good quote.
It is. Yeah, and DelMonte wholeheartedly agrees with this idea, stressing that body weight exercises should be the fundamental building blocks of any training program, no matter what your body type or fitness goals might be.
Okay.
So if you haven't developed the ability to effectively control and move your own body through various ranges of motion, adding external weight too soon can significantly increase your risk of injury.
Right. It's like trying to run before you can walk.
Exactly. And he makes the point that for many people, especially those who might consider themselves naturally thin or skinny,
Right.
the argument that their own body weight is already too much to handle really doesn't hold up.
Yeah, that's a good point.
He gives a range of examples of functional body weight movements, including, classic exercises like push-ups, chin-ups, pull-ups, handstand push-ups, dips, wall sits,
Okay.
and more dynamic movements like one-leg squats, one-leg deadlifts, one-leg back extensions, and even simple sit-ups.
Right.
And he reminds us that the beauty of body weight training is that you can do it virtually anywhere.
Yeah, you don't need any equipment.
Exactly.
That's convenient.
So the body weight conditioning program he outlines is structured as a circuit
Okay.
where you perform each exercise for one set of 30 seconds, followed by a 30-second rest period.
Okay.
And you aim to maintain a consistent speed throughout each 30-second work interval.
All right.
So the exercises in the circuit include standard push-ups, mountain climbers burpees, high knee drills, which is running in place with high knees, body weight squats, close grip chin-ups, bench dips, modified pull-ups using a lower bar, or assistance alternating split squat jumps, single leg hip extensions, body weight, or verts lunges, single leg plank raises, and oblique adductor raises.
Wow. That's a full body workout.
It is a full body workout.
Yeah.
And the bonus tips for this circuit emphasize the continuous nature of the workout and suggest using a stopwatch with 30-second work and rest intervals.
Okay.
The goal during each 30-second work period is to perform as many repetitions as you can with good form.
Okay. So as many as possible.
Exactly, yeah. And he recommends focusing on a faster tempo to maximize your rep count within the time limit.
Right.
If you're just starting out and find the full circuit too challenging, he suggests modifying it by perhaps grouping upper and lower body exercises on separate days initially.
Okay.
But he stresses that the key here is intensity, pushing yourself within each work interval.
Right. Give it your all.
Yeah, he advises gradually building up to 3 sets of the circuit with a 1-minute rest between sets.
Okay.
And if the 30-second work intervals start to feel too easy, you can even increase them to 45 seconds.
So you can adjust it as you get stronger.
Yeah, exactly. So now we're getting into some more advanced strategies with priority number 6, which is decreasing any lagging body parts by using specific intensity techniques.
Okay, interesting.
So this is where you can really start to target those muscles that might not be developing as well as others.
Right. Everyone has those stubborn areas.
Exactly. So he introduces a few interesting methods. The first is called 1 1/2.
1 1/2.
Yeah, and he uses the leg extension machine as an example. So you would extend your leg, fully pause briefly, then lower it only halfway down, pause again, then extend it fully again, and only then return to the starting position.
Okay, so it's like a half rep in there.
Exactly, yeah. And that whole sequence, full extension, halfway down, full extension, all the way down, counts as just 1 repetition.
Okay.
He says this is a really effective way to isolate and overload the weakest part of a muscle's range of motion.
I see.
And it definitely creates a significant burn.
Oh, I bet.
Then there are 21s.
Okay.
And while this isn't a brand new technique, it's often associated with biceps curls.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
But he suggests it could be effectively applied to almost every muscle group.
Okay.
His preferred way to do them is to perform 7 half repetitions in the weakest part of the movement's range,
Okay.
immediately followed by 7 full repetitions through the entire range, and then immediately by 7 half repetitions in the strongest part of the range.
Okay.
He recommends pausing briefly at each change of direction to really maximize the muscle engagement.
Okay.
He also talks about slow speed methods, which don't necessarily involve lifting very heavy weights,
Okay.
but are fantastic for really focusing on activating the target muscles and improving the stability around your joints.
Okay.
He mentions using lifting tempos like 8-1-4-6-1-3 and 5-1-5.
Okay, those are very specific.
Yeah, and he breaks down the 8-1-4 tempo for us,
Okay.
explaining that it means taking 8 seconds to lower the weight, which is the eccentric or negative phase, then pausing for 1 second at the bottom, and then taking 4 seconds to lift the weight, which is the concentric or positive phase.
Okay.
And naturally, with such a slow tempo, you're going to be doing significantly fewer repetitions.
Right, you're really feeling it
Exactly, yeah.
with every rep.
Perhaps one of the more unconventional ideas he presents here, though, is the concept of training smaller muscle groups before larger muscle groups.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, this goes against what's often considered standard practice in weight training.
Yeah, you usually do the big muscles first
You do, yeah,
to save energy for those.
exactly. But his logic is that if you consistently train your smaller lagging muscle groups, at the end of your workouts when you're always fatigued, they're never going to get the focus and energy they need to catch up to the development of your larger muscle groups.
Oh, okay, I see.
And this can eventually even lead to plateaus in your larger muscles as well.
That makes sense.
So he suggests taking a moment to really assess your own physique and make a list of all your major muscle groups.
Okay.
Then rank them in order from what you perceive to be your weakest to your strongest.
Okay, so really think about it.
Yeah, and he mentions that common areas of weakness for many people tend to be the calves, abs, forearms, and arms.
Okay, yeah, those are often neglected.
They are, yeah, as those often don't receive the same volume and priority in training as the bigger muscle groups, like chest, back, shoulders, and legs.
Right, everyone wants to focus on the blamer muscles.
Exactly, and he emphasizes a pretty straightforward principle. The exercises you perform first in your workout and the muscle groups you train earliest in your training week are the ones that tend to get your best effort, and as a result often see the most improvement.
Okay.
He points out that it's natural to want to prioritize the exercises you enjoy the most.
Right.
But during this upside-down training phase, the focus is deliberately shifted to training your weak muscles first,
Okay.
essentially breaking that traditional rule of never train a small muscle before a large muscle.
So you're flipping things upside down.
Exactly, and he gives some practical examples like how specifically working on your shoulder stabilizers and triceps first could lead to improvements in your bench press.
Okay.
Strengthening your forearms could help you pull more weight in a lat pull-down, and focusing on your core and glutes could enhance your squat strength.
So it's all connected.
It is, yeah. So during this period of upside-down training, those smaller muscle groups that often get less attention, like your forearms, traps, biceps, triceps, and calves, will be moved up in the priority list.
Okay.
And receive more training volume earlier in your workouts.
So they get the attention they deserve.
Exactly. So finally, we arrive at priority number 7, which is decreasing weak angles of a muscle by making adjustments to your training technique.
Okay. Technique?
Yeah, and he points out that people with longer limbs who might have a bit of a mechanical disadvantage in certain exercises can particularly benefit from fine-tuning their form.
Okay.
So he provides some very specific technique adjustments for a variety of common exercises.
Like what?
So for squats, he recommends trying to go as low as possible, ideally, with your butt reaching your ankles,
Okay.
using a slightly wider stance with your toes pointed out a little bit,
Okay.
and only going as low as you can while maintaining a flat back.
Right.
He even suggests considering front squats if you find your hip flexibility is limiting your depth in back squats.
Okay.
For the bench press, he advises keeping your elbows tucked in closer to your body rather than flaring them out wide,
Okay.
as this can often put more emphasis on the shoulders and triceps.
Right.
If you have longer arms, he suggests leaving a slightly larger gap, maybe 1 to 2 inches between the bar and your chest when you lower it.
Okay.
When it comes to shoulder presses, he recommends allowing the dumbbells to come down a bit lower than your shoulders at the bottom of the movement.
Okay.
And again, for those with longer arms, he suggests not fully locking out your elbows at the top, perhaps extending only about 3/4 of the way up to maintain tension on the muscles.
Right.
He emphasizes the importance of fully locking out your elbow joint at the top of triceps exercises and making sure to fully extend your arm at the elbow during biceps curls, always keeping your palms facing upwards throughout the movement.
Okay.
For lat pull-downs, he stresses the need to fully elevate your shoulder blades at the top of the movement and then pull the bar down until it touches your clavicle.